society cannot know itself if it does not have an accurate memory of its own history. This is a quote from Yuk Chang of the Documentation Center of Cambodia, stressing the importance of remembering a nation's history. Throughout human history, people have suffered many hardships. But to what extent do these hardships go? I believe the ultimate answer is genocide, the systematic and deliberate destruction of an ethnic, racial, or religious group of people. And just to stress the scale of genocides, the Boxing Day tsunami, one of the worst natural disasters in human history, killed about 230,000 people, while the Holocaust killed 6 million people. That's 25 times more than the Boxing Day tsunami. So ironically, we are the biggest danger to ourselves. On April 24th, 1915, at the height of World War I, the Ottoman government began the mass murder of the Greek, Assyrian, and Armenian populations in Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. This culminated from religious and cultural differences, as well as the rise of Turkish nationalism in the early 20th century. They set out to drive most, if not all, non-Muslim, non-Turkish groups from the Ottoman Empire, and started with the intellectual and educated Armenians, Greeks, and Assyrians to ensure there was little to no resistance when they drove entire communities from their homes and sent them on death marches through the desert. And by the time it was over in 1923, an estimated 1.5 million Assyrians, Greeks, and Armenians had died. What I just described to you is the Armenian genocide, or Metzyergen in Armenian. As an Armenian, my family is all too familiar with this apex of destruction. And I have heard too many stories, not only from my grandmother, but from other relatives, about not just the Armenian genocide, but mass killings of Armenians in Azerbaijan during the 80s over ethnic tensions. And at the same time, most students and people my age have never heard of this. And this is nothing new. In fact, before the invasion of Poland that started World War II, Hitler said in a speech to his generals, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" referencing how he thought the world would not remember the Holocaust, just as it had forgotten the Armenian genocide. Okay. But genocides aren't something of the past. As we speak, Muslim Rohingyas in Myanmar are being attacked and slaughtered as the international community does nothing. Why is this? Why do nations stand by? And more importantly, why do we not see citizens of these nations taking action to stop these genocides? But where am I going with this? What does this all mean? And how do we help prevent it? To answer these questions, I decided I would do some research. At the time, I was going on a trip to Cambodia, a nation which during the 70s under the rule of the Khmer Rouge had faced a bloody genocide that wiped out 25% of its population. So I looked for organizations there that worked to alleviate the effects of genocide and prevent future genocides from ever occurring. I interviewed the executive director of the organization, Yuk Chang, who told me about a few preventive measures his organization was taking in Cambodia. This included tribunals to bring perpetrators to justice, recognition, discussion, and research to ensure we have an extensive knowledge on the history of the topic, and finally, education to ensure all of this does not slip away from future generations. Education in particular immediately resonated with me. At Green School, we pride ourselves on being a sustainable and progressive school, yet many of our students don't have more than a superficial understanding of what genocide really is. So through education, we can show how and why genocides happen and create a more informed generation that can spread their knowledge. And from this, we will have a generation that can advocate for change. So, believing education is one of the most effective ways to help prevent genocide, I decided the best way to go about implementing this at Green School would be to teach a Green School high school class on it in order to take the first step in bringing this education to Green School. I planned 3 lessons for a 10th grade class to show it was more than possible. And I decided to focus on 2 things: the historical aspect of genocide and the psychological aspect of genocide. The historical part of the class would focus on how a genocide culminates and reaches extermination. To do this, I used something called the 10 Stages of Genocide by Genocide Watch. These 10 stages set a criteria for how a genocide culminates, and then I had students research how the Rwandan genocide progressed through these stages. This part of the class also allowed them to realize that genocide acts like an iceberg, with most of what makes a genocide happening before extermination, being hardly visible to outsiders. This begins with psychological stages, like classification and symbolization, that happen almost individually and subconsciously. Then it progresses to social stages, like discrimination, dehumanization, and organization. These happen within social cliques and local communities. Then it becomes societal and and then it progresses to violence, and then further denial. This part of the class also acted as somewhat of an introduction to the idea of genocide before we explored more complex ideas. The second part of the class would focus on the psychological aspect of genocide, to answer the almost biblical question, why do neighbors turn on neighbors? And shows those that say, well, I would never commit a genocide, that they were no exception. I began with an activity that segregated those that could roll their tongues from those that could not, and I put them on opposite sides of the classroom. I would then lie to them, explaining that those that could roll their tongues were more superior and prone to success in life. I also showed them a slide to make it seem more convincing. After that, a video would be played explaining how something as small as a simple prejudice or stereotype, or whether or not you could roll your tongue, could, if exploited by a government, potentially lead to a genocide. I also wanted to show students that anyone could potentially participate in a genocide, and that most people, in fact, would participate. For this, I turned to the Milgram Study. An experiment was done in 1963 by a Yale University psychologist by the name of Stanley Milgram on human obedience to authority figures. The experiment was disguised as a memory study. It had a subject act as a teacher, or in this case, L, who would teach word pairs to the learner, or S, who was supposedly behind a wall, however was just pre-recorded audio tapes. Through a machine labeled with buttons, the experimenter would, the subject would shock the learner for each mistake, increasing by 15 volts for each mistake, while the experimenter, or V, would reassure the learner that they were not responsible and urge them to continue the experiment. At some point, the learner, which was actually just pre-recorded audio, would begin to shout and demand that the teacher let him go. Still, 65% of participants went on to shock to the maximum voltage, at which point S, or the learner, would remain silent, giving the impression that they had died. After I showed the students this, I explained what it tells us about how humans will blindly obey authority figures, convincing themselves that they are just following orders. And with this, I concluded my 3-day course. I felt that this class was really telling, in that it showed that it was within reach to teach such a complex and heavy topic with the help of activities to engage the class. And if given more time to teach about genocides, we can really create a generation of people informed on the topic that can take action not only against other human-caused occurrences, like climate change, but also against this gross negligence of human life, that is genocide. I, an 8th grader, taught 10th graders about genocides in 3 days. And if I can do it, then imagine what a teacher could do with more time or more of a student body. Genocide is a big theme, and as an individual, it might seem daunting to try to do anything about it. I hope through this, I have shown you, and you have taken away, that genocides don't just happen. They consist of many stages and steps, many that surround us every day, but also that they start small, and anyone can act in an evil way given the right circumstances. And by raising awareness to prevent genocides, we can help mitigate a genocide while it's still small. I taught the class and it works. However, we need a larger, more lasting impact at Green School and perhaps beyond. I will continue to pursue this project and try to make it a standard curricular course at Green School. If you agree that this is important and wish to help me continue this effort, please contact me or a member of the Green School teaching staff. I would like to thank you for listening to what I had to say, and I would like to thank my mentors, Ibu Jackie, Ibu Emily, and Pak Tom. I would also like to thank my parents for supporting me throughout my quest.